What is up, YouTubers? Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs just finished with the #1 recruiting class. We decided to dive in and compare that to Nick Saban and Alabama's best class since he's been there in 2007. So if you're interested, stay tuned. This is Bama Versus. What is up, everybody? Clint Lamb with Touchdown Alabama Magazine. Yet again, I'm sitting here with my co-host Jake Weaver, and this is Bama Versus. Now, on this week's episode, what we decided to do is take a look at two recruiting classes that we feel like are some of the best of all time, and that is Alabama's class from 2017 and Georgia's recent class in 2018. They, of course, finished with the #1 class in both years, so we're going to be kind of comparing those two to see which is actually better. Now, Jake, we have two phenomenal classes here. Get everybody started with what your initial thoughts were on Georgia's class.
Well, I think everybody knows that Georgia had one of the, if not the greatest class in the history of recruiting. And I think, they had the most 5 stars in a class ever with 7. And then on top of that, they still had 15 4-stars and a handful of 3-star guys. But really, I think what is the most important thing that they did was that they filled some spots that were going to be vacant next season. The loss of guys like Roquan Smith and then some of the other guys on the defensive side, they had a lot of spots that needed to be filled. And I think they did that with this really, really, really good class. But Clint, I think Georgia's bread and butter last year, especially offensively, besides throwing back shoulder passes to Wims, was their running game. And they're going to lose both of those studs this year. Now, they still have Swift in the backfield, but Kirby Smart has shown that he likes to have the two-back system and to have the two guys that are a change of pace to get them both out there and keep them healthy. That's how they like to attack the defenses. And it worked against Alabama's great defense. And so what we see here is, once again, it looks like they're going to have another great backfield, Clint. They've got Zamir White, who was the best running back in this recruiting class, 5-star guy, I really think he's going to be really special. If you've watched any of his tape, the guy can really see the field, which is excellent for a ball carrier.
I definitely agree. And to me, with these two running backs, they got, of course, Zamir White, but also James Cook, Dalvin Cook's little brother. I really thought that Florida State would have a chance to steal him away from the Bulldogs, and they weren't able to. And I just think he is going to be the perfect guy for the future of that Georgia backfield to really give them that 1-2 punch, that thunder and lightning combination that has been so lethal. I think that of the two guys, Cook reminds me the most of a guy like Sonny Michel. I think he'll be able to provide a lot of the same things that Michel did to the offense. And then, of course, with White being 6'1", 220 pounds, he brings that size. He runs with power. Like you said, he runs with vision. And I think both of these guys are going to be special backs. And when you add these two guys in with the class that they already had from previous years, with guys like Swift, Holyfield, people of that nature, you are going to have one of the best backfields in the entire country for not just next year, but the next couple of years.
Well, let's look at the backfield a little bit there, Clint. Let's look at it and say, like you said, you think this could be one of the best backfields. Well, there was a lot of talk about Alabama having one of the best backfields this coming up season, as far as with having Najee Harris, Damian Harris returning, Joshua Jacobs returning, and then you still got Brian Robinson in the wings. What do you think as far as backfields go? It's kind of hard to say without seeing a lot of the Georgia recruits play yet. But from just on paper, who do you think would win that battle?
Well, I think that you look at the fact that both teams in the last 2 years have finished with the #1 running back. Of course, we've already talked about White, who is the #1 running back in this class. And then, of course, Alabama had Najee Harris from last year's class, and he was the #1 running back. And he was actually the better overall player. He was the #2 player in the country compared to White, who was the #9. And I think that those guys actually have a lot of similarities as far as their style. Now, I do feel like Harris, as far as being a receiving back, is a lot further along than a guy like White, even though White is still capable of being a threat out of the backfield. I think that Harris, that's probably one of the best things he does, despite his size, which of course he's got elite size, solid speed. I think that those two guys are very comparable. So I guess it then comes down to James Cook versus Brian Robinson, and we saw Robinson in a limited fashion last year as a true freshman, despite all the depth at running back, and we quickly came to realize why. He's a pretty special talent too, and I think he was underrated in that class last year. He was barely in the top 50. I think he was at like number 145, but he was the number 8 running back in the class, and he definitely shows talent as well. But to me, these two classes and what they've been built around was quarterbacks, and we understand the importance of those because Alabama didn't have one in this year's class, but that's because last year they finished with the number 1 dual threat quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa. In Georgia this year, despite having the depth that they already had at quarterback, they were able to pull in a guy like Justin Fields, and that to me is so crucial because your entire class is built around the quarterback position, just like your entire roster really is if you want a chance to consistently compete for national championships. So as far as these two quarterbacks, I mean, do you think that Justin Fields could have the level of impact that a guy like Tagovailoa both did as a true freshman that we think he will moving forward? And I understand that there's depth in the way, but at the same time, down the line, do you see Fields having the same level of success as Tagovailoa?
You know, I think that is going to be what Fields' whole college career is going to be discussed about. That is going to be the headline of every season for him. And ultimately, it comes down to a couple of things. Is Jake Fromm an NFL prospect? Well, I would say yes. I would say 2 years, I could very easily see him being a first or second round guy, and I could see him leaving early, giving Fields the opportunity to stay longer and to get those seasons as the starter if he is as good as he looks. The ultimate thing, Clint, is I don't see that Fields is going to really and truly compete for that spot until Fromm is out of the way. Unless Fields goes out there and he's Deshaun Watson 2.0, it's too hard after everything that Fromm did for the team last year. And we saw without Jacob Eason, that's going to be another thing to affect and something to watch. With Jacob Eason officially transferring to Washington, I don't have that backup quarterback that they had. So you have to look, is Kirby still going to want to redshirt Fields? Is he going to want to keep him like Nick Saban did with Tua, where he just keeps him on the sideline?
Well, I think that with Fields, you are going to see something similar to how Saban deployed Tagovailoa early on in the season. Granted, we all saw the talent of Tagovailoa, and Fromm, as far as his ability to be a threat to defenses with his arm, is on a completely different level than Hurts was. But I think the concept as far as the way that Tagovailoa kind of got his feet wet early on in the year with Alabama blowing out a lot of teams and being able to get him into the second half of games really helped his development early, and it helped build the depth of Alabama's quarterback position after losing, 3 different guys to transfer. And see, Georgia, I think, has the ability to whip up on teams a lot next year. And so I would not be surprised to see Fields get the same kind of opportunities. I completely agree with you. I don't think he's going to threaten Fromm's job. I think Fromm, based off of what I've seen, if he continues to develop and as they put more on his shoulders, I think he's a future top 10 pick in the NFL. But go ahead.
Let me ask you. You talk about Fromm, and if you go back and you watched Georgia last year, I think we can both agree that his favorite receiver was number 6, Wims. I don't think anybody would deny that Javon Wims was his guy. Time and time again, he came through on those insanely great catches. He did it against Alabama even. Obviously, Wims was a senior, so Wims will not be there next year. My question to you is, without that guy, who can they go to next? Do you see a receiver in this class that could step up for them and be that sure-handed receiver?
Well, Jake, I don't think that Georgia was able to pull in the same level of talent at the wide receiver position in this class that Alabama was able to last year. I mean, Alabama had 3 guys, Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs III. All those guys were top 75 guys according to 247 Sports composite. Georgia, on the other hand, really the main threat that they have as far as a guy that can come in and get early playing time is a guy like Tommy Bush. Granted, he is a top 200 player. He is an extremely talented guy. I think that his size can really help in that Georgia receiving core. But to me, I think that what we're going to be looking at next year is probably a guy like Riley Ridley, who we all saw make a significant impact in the national championship game against Alabama. I think he steps up to be that guy. I think that Terry Godwin, McCole Hardman, I mean, all of those guys are capable, and so I wouldn't, in certain packages or situations, I could see a guy like Tommy Bush stepping up and getting some early playing time, but I do not see him being the go-to guy this early in his career. Now, when you look at these two classes, you're looking at Georgia having 16 players out of their 26 total commitments, which is 61.5%, that were top 5 at their position coming out of high school. That is outstanding to have that percentage. If you compare that to Alabama's, they only had 12 guys out of their 29 commitments, which is barely over 40%, that were at the top 5 at their position. I mean, you look at this class with guys like Fields. They had the number 1 dual threat quarterback, the number 1 running back, the number 1 guard, the number 1 outside linebacker, and the number 1 punter. Now, granted, Alabama last year really helped their numbers by having guys, they also had the number 1 dual threat quarterback, the number 1 running back, a top offensive lineman in Alex Leatherwood, and then a couple of major impact JUCO guys, and we saw that with Isaiah Buggs, but a guy that we didn't see, and it remains to be seen if he'll ever be able to crack the starting lineup in Alabama's offense, and that's Elliott Baker. He was the number 1 JUCO offensive tackle coming out of coming out of college, and we weren't able to see much of him. And with the youth at the position, I don't know if we're ever going to. So I just think when you're comparing these two classes, it is insane how much Georgia was able to pull in as far as top players at their position across the board. It was very balanced. So, okay, now granted, we've been talking a lot about Georgia's class, but Alabama's class was phenomenal in its own right. To me, who are some guys next year that you're really looking to step up? You got the obvious guys like Tua Tagovailoa, Jerry Jeudy, potentially Najee Harris, but who are some other guys from that class who you expect to make a significant impact in year 2?
I think we've touched on a lot of the guys that we all know are going to step up, but one guy that a lot of fans were excited about was Tyrell Shavers, 4-star guy. He was a top 100, 12th overall at the wide receiver position, and his size was impeccable. He's measured in at about 6'6", a little under 200 pounds, and this is a guy that, Alabama hasn't had the go-to size receiver. Julio, I think, showed a lot of the ability to go up and get the ball and to pull it over guys' heads and that kind of thing, but there's never been that toss it up to the guy and let him just make that corner of the end zone catch so much as what we might see out of a guy like Tyrell Shavers. There's a lot to be seen yet with him not touching the field much this season, but I think that is a guy that is bringing a lot of hype behind him. But Clint, we've talked a lot about offense, and I think one thing that we might want to hit on more here is their defensive classes, because I think these might be 2 of the greatest defensive classes you can look at. With stats aside, playing time aside for the Alabama recruits, when you just look at it on paper, these are some really good classes, and what Georgia was able to do in the recruiting trail on defense is just unbelievable. Tyson Campbell, 5-star guy, 2nd best overall corner in the country. That might be one of the positions they lacked the most in last season, was their coverage ability. They had the defensive line and the linebackers, but their cover guys were the ones that seemed to sometimes hurt them the most.
I definitely agree with you, and to me, he was such an incredible get for that Georgia Bulldogs secondary. Alabama was able to counter that move a little bit with his high school teammate, and Patrick Surtain Jr., but, there's no denying that Cam was going to make an instant impact for this Georgia Bulldogs defense. And then you got just outside linebackers and pass rushers for days. Adam Anderson, Brenton Cox. They were able to steal away Quay Walker from Alabama. To me, that was huge. If he would have stuck with Alabama's class from this year would have stayed top 5. I think he can make an early impact. They have a lot of depth in their front 7, but to me, a player like Quay Walker who was able to do pretty much everything. I mean, he was only a 4-star prospect, but he was right outside of that 5-star status. And I think that, before it's all said and done, he can be one of the best players from this class. But it is not just, Otis Reese, Channing Tindall. All of those guys can make an impact early on in their careers. Now, guys like Reese and Tyndall and guys like that, they need to be able to add a little bit of weight to hold up on, the level that they're going to be playing at, with it being in the SEC. But those are guys that in certain situations, both of them can get after the quarterback. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Reese be a situational pass rusher. Now, if you look at the fact that Alabama gray-shirted a top 100 guy last year in Jerez Parks, I think, with the depth issues that Alabama had on the edge this season, adding him to this class along with several other high-profile edge rushers is really going to help the depth moving forward. But I feel like last year, when they started having those kind of depth issues, I really believe Parks would have been one of the main guys to have been able to step up over a guy like Chris Allen or even Jamie Mosley. Jamie Mosley was phenomenal, but I really like Jerez Parks and what he can be in this class. The only reason that he was not a part of the 2017 class was simply because of the timing of his commitment, and Alabama simply didn't have the room. But he is a special player, and another guy to look out for from last year's class, I absolutely love his playing style. That's Xavier McKinney, the safety. I think that with Alabama losing so much at that position, their top 3 safeties, there's a wide open spot for him to start next to Deontay Thompson, and I think he takes full advantage of it. He can play down in the box. He has coverage skills. I absolutely love what he brings to the table. But, okay, so we've talked a little bit. We've touched on both classes. To you, when you're looking at these classes, who would you side with as far as having the advantage?
When you look at it from just a observant standpoint and you look at the classes, obviously Georgia's grades out better. It grades out better as far as the quality of players that they got, and I think if you look at the vacancies that they had to fill, they clearly filled those so well, unbelievably well. But Clint, I really think, despite all that, I still think that Alabama's 2017 recruiting class was better. And I think the reason for that being, they managed to snag just a ton of offense. And Alabama has never been a team known for offense. Amari Cooper was a great, Calvin Ridley was a great, Julio Jones was a great, Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry. You get all these certain skill positions, but they've never had a congregation of them. They've never had more than 1 or 2 star-powered players on the offensive side of the ball, and it almost feels like they're on the verge of an offensive juggernaut. If Tua comes out and takes the starting position like we all expect him to this year, you're talking about a team with multiple, I would say, even though they're all sophomores, these receivers are almost veterans at this point after playing all the way to the national championship and winning it. I think you have to think about everything that they've learned in that time. And so I think you're talking about returning receivers, all these running backs coming back. All of a sudden, you've got this star power, sort of a question mark, but there's a very, very, very high potential for star power at quarterback with Tua. And then you've got Mike Locksley, an offensive coordinator, who really knows the guys. He knows the receivers. He knows the running backs. He knows the quarterbacks. He knows those guys so well. And despite his past flops as a coordinator or a head coach in Maryland or what have you, I think he knows these guys so well, and they all responded. They all wanted Mike Locksley so badly that I think they're going to respond to him really well, and I think that this offense is going to be something. So I think you have to look at it. Yes, they had a great defensive recruiting class. Some of the guys have not yet gotten on the field like we expected. Dylan Moses was forced into action with all the injuries. I think LeBron Ray got a couple of plays, but for the most part, Isaiah Buggs, JUCO, great guy. He was tremendous last year. I expect him to come back out again next year and have an even better season. But ultimately, I think you have to go with Alabama because of the offensive firepower that they were able to ascertain despite being known for their defense.
Well, the way that I'm looking at this is I think I got to go with Georgia here, Jake, simply because I feel like Georgia was able to match Alabama's offensive output from last year in this year's class. Number 1 dual threat quarterback, the number 1 running back. They were able, now the way that Georgia builds their offense is around the running game. They didn't tackle the offensive tackle position like Alabama did last year, but at the same time, they got Isaiah Wilson and Andrew Thomas, who are two premium tackle prospects from last year's class as well. But this year, they were able to get the number 1 offensive guard, the number 3 offensive guard, the number 3 offensive tackle, the number 4 center. They built around the trenches, but at the same time they have an elite quarterback prospect moving forward and a couple of running backs that I think are going to be outstanding in a couple of years. That they can work their way up the depth chart, which I fully expect both of these guys to be able to do, even with the talent that Georgia's already got with guys like Swift in the roster. Now, the receivers, they didn't quite match Alabama's class from last year, but at the same time, that really could be a weakness. I'm not going to say that it's not, but I just feel like from top to bottom, you look at these two classes, and while they are very similar, and I don't want to take away from Alabama's class, what I really wanted to do here was look at the fact that I need to be looking at this from them coming out of high school. Seeing Tagovailoa and what he was able to do as a true freshman, I think he's a once-in-a-lifetime quarterback. But at the same time, I can't take that into consideration when it comes to these two classes, and just knowing that he was an elite quarterback prospect, and I loved what I saw on film from him. I also think Justin Fields, as far as coming out of high school, was every bit the same as far as the caliber of prospect, and I feel like Georgia really hit on some crucial needs. While Alabama did too, I have to side with Georgia, and to me, at the end of the day, both of these classes are going to be crucial to Alabama continuing to compete with Georgia for the national championship.
Now, Clint, let me ask you this. Now, you talk so much about the quarterbacks. Now, obviously, this is the first time we've ever disagreed, so this is going to be this will be fun. But you talk a lot about the quarterbacks. Let me ask you this though: when was the last time you saw a quarterback be truly great without any overly talented receivers? I think that's an excellent. Even if you go to the NFL, I mean, Carson Wentz. Besides, obviously the Eagles won the championship without him. But Carson Wentz for the Eagles last year, they were awful. Carson Wentz was a mediocre quarterback, and all of a sudden he comes out this year, and he was the MVP favorite until going down for the rest of the year. Now, because they added Alshon Jeffrey, Aguilar stepped up and played better. They got better receivers. And so it doesn't matter how good some of those quarterbacks can be. Do you think that without those superstar receivers, or at least one somewhat star receiver, do you think they can still be who they, as good as they really are?
Well, I think that when you're looking at it, they've recruited plenty well enough. McCole Hardman, he is definitely, he's a former 5-star guy, was listed as an athlete, but we've saw what he's been able to do as a return man. He had a big play versus Alabama for a touchdown. You look at guys like Riley Ridley. So in this particular class, and then last year's class, they were able to haul, I think at least 3 or 4 more 4-star receivers. So I think that they definitely have the talent already in the fold. They add a guy like Tommy Bush, and then you turn around and that can be an area where you can address it next year. So I think that they have the necessary weapons. Despite losing a guy like Wims, they got tight ends for days. They were able to add 2, if I'm not mistaken, 2 4-star tight ends in this class, and then they have former 5-star guys and 4-star guys already there. So I think that the weapons at receiver and tight end are way more than good enough to hold them over until they're able to address that in next year's class, and I fully expect them to be able to. So I think personally they're fine, but we have finally disagreed. So
Clint, this is our first time disagreeing here, and I think what we're gonna have to do this week is we need to outsource this one, man. I think we got to go to the comment section. We need to let everybody listening, watching, whatever you're doing. We need you guys to voice your opinions, and whoever the overwhelming favorite is, Clint, I think that's pretty fair to say that's the one that's going to win, right? Now I think I would like some compelling arguments. Let's see what everybody has to say, and comment below and tell us why you feel like you feel the way you do about it. But I think this should be pretty fun, and we will let you guys know next week who officially won.
Perfect. And to me, I think you got 2 outstanding classes, so I don't really think you can go wrong here, but I definitely would be curious to see who the tiebreaker is. I fully expect to win. This Georgia class is outstanding, but I guess we'll wait to find out. But this has been Bama Versus. We are so glad that you guys have been along for the ride. I'm Clint Lamb. He's Jake Weaver. Leave a comment below telling us who you think had the better class. So as promised, we wanted to get you guys in on the discussion, so we decided to take the best comments from the first 2 episodes that we did of Bama Versus and bring those to light. Now the first one that we're going to be talking about is from Paul Robinson, who commented on the Saban versus Belichick video. I think he brought up an excellent point, should definitely be brought to you guys' attention. I mentioned in the video that Alabama had won every national championship that they have won up to this point with a different quarterback, and of course that's not true. A.J. McCarron in both 2011 and 2012 against LSU and Notre Dame was the starting quarterback when they ended up winning those. So that one is 100% accurate. You are right, Paul. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. It is much appreciated. Now this next comment comes from Tootie Ray, talking about how he feels like Jalen Hurts is going to end up being the starting quarterback in 2018. And I got to be honest with you, Tootie, I just don't see it. I appreciate you bringing that view, because both me and Jake both felt like Tua was going to end up winning that job. And there are a lot of people out there who agree with you. That is just not our personal opinion on who's going to end up winning the job. But at this point, none of us can know. So we definitely appreciate your comment. Keep it coming. And last but not least, this last comment comes from Derek Everett, talking about the battle between Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. And he feels like there's a creative way that you can get both guys involved by maybe having Hurts playing some type of tailback position in the shotgun with a guy like Tua next to him, and having the center, who we don't know who it is yet, potentially snap it to either one of them. I think that's very creative. I'm not exactly sure that will end up being used in any sort of packages or formations, but it is an interesting point, and I do think that the offensive coordinator, Mike Locksley, can get very creative in how he uses Jalen Hurts if Hurts ends up switching positions, which is very likely at this point. So that is all the comments from this week. We appreciate you guys participating. We want to continue to get you guys involved, so definitely continue to leave comments, like the video, and like we said before, definitely subscribe. This has been Bama Versus. We're out.